By the Conservative Financial Secretary to the Treasury, David Gauke. Good evening. Well, answer Chris's question, please. How much is it going to cost?
Well, it partly depends on what's going to happen with train services and so on. So it's not possible to put a precise number on it. It's also worth pointing out that there's no particular assumption that train fares will increase RPI +1. That's what's happened in the past. But the costs are in the low hundreds of millions by the end of the Parliament.
So what Chris was saying is it'll be about 100 million the first year, and that will only rise in the next 4 years. So this is a pretty substantial policy, uncosted and unpaid for.
Well, what we're saying is that when the next spending review occurs under a Conservative government, one thing that we are not going to be doing is trying to raise a lot of money by putting rail fares up very considerably above inflation. We're not going to be doing that, and we're being very straightforward and saying to people that just as we have done, as Chris rightly said, just as we've done in the last 2 years, where we've capped increases in line with inflation, where we've capped in line with inflation, we will continue to do that over the course of the next Parliament.
So it transfers the spend from the rail user to the state?
Well, what it's saying is that we are not going further to transferring the cost to the rail user, which we've seen as a trend started in 2004 under the last Labour government. There was a trend in which more of the cost was passed on to the rail user. What we're saying is, I think we've gone as far as we should do on that, and that it is right that those people who are working and travelling into work are not going to be hit, and we're just making that clear today.
But what Chris is saying is that this is going to disproportionately support the richest fifth of all households and disproportionately hit the poorest households.
Well, there are a lot of people who commute into work who find this find rail fares a significant cost to them, whether they are high earning or low earning. And it's important that the Conservative Party is very clear to people that we're not going to be punishing rail users for commuting in because their working requirements require them to do so.
But I'm interested because you hit Ed Miliband hard when you talked about a freeze on energy prices. Then in another policy, you hit students with tuition fees, and yet what you're doing is you want disproportionately to give commuters a break.
Well, I think it's important, particularly in an environment where we've got a larger working population than we've ever had before, where we are seeing a number of cities, not just London, but also northern cities with the Northern Powerhouse expanding and becoming much stronger, that you want people commuting in, providing a big workforce for those cities, and that we don't try and clobber the rail user by hiking up fares way above inflation.
But I wonder where this sits.
And we haven't done that for the last 2 years, and we're not going to do it for the next 5.
But I wonder where this sits with the Conservative world view of less interference by the state, because what you're doing is actually just by this one policy tweaking it so you've got more interference by the state.
Well, it's consistent with what we have done for the last 2 years.
So you believe in that kind of interference?
In terms of, well, it is the case that governments of all parties provide support for public transport, and that is what we are doing here. And we believe that we've got the balance right, and we want to keep that balance, and that means that we are going to increase rail fares in line with inflation over the next 5 years, and not above that. And we're being straightforward to people that that's not one way in which we're going to try to clobber them. That's not our approach.
Can we turn to the big political row today over the personal attack on Ed Miliband? Do you think Ed Miliband is an honourable man?
Well, I have no particular complaints about Ed Miliband generally, but I do have to say that his approach in terms of running for the leadership, I think the idea that people should be shocked at the suggestion that he stabbed his brother in the back is rather surprising. Anyone who's met many members of the public in the last few weeks will have heard that comment made. So I stand by it. I stand by him bringing it back.
So can I just ask you, you talk about the way he related to his brother. Then presumably do you also agree with the Michael Fallon line that actually stabbing the British people in the back by possibly doing a deal with the SNP? So you do too think he's a backstabber?
I think there's a really important point here. And I don't resile from the word backstabber at all.
But backstabber is also another word for backstabber is traitor. These are incredibly strong words.
There's a really important point here. There is a reasonable chance after the next election that there will be no one party in overall control. Of course, I don't want that to happen, but that may well happen. Then there's a question about the character of the leaders of the parties and how they will react to that situation.
That's a very...
And how important is it for them to become Prime Minister at whatever cost?
That's very clear.
Or is it something where there are some things that you just don't compromise?
Okay, that's very clear then. I want to ask you a very straightforward question. Do you think then that Ed Miliband is unfit to be a Prime Minister?
I don't think Ed Miliband is the right person to be Prime Minister, and I don't believe that in the circumstances that we might face, that it would be right to have somebody who has got one shot at being Prime Minister, and that's the position here with Ed Miliband, and his record and his past demonstrates that he will do what it takes to become Prime Minister.
So that, by your very words, then you're endorsing, in a sense, the idea that what we're looking at in the next 4 weeks is a pretty negative campaign.
Well, look, if on negative campaigning, I've spent the day attending a launch of an apprenticeship programme, as indeed many Conservative ministers have done. There are a lot of positive things that we're doing. One we're announcing tonight about rail fares. So there's a lot of positive things about our campaign, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to point out the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities and the problems that would be faced if we don't have a clear result and a Conservative majority after the next election.
David Gauke, thank you very much. Well, Michael Fallon's personal attack on Ed Miliband was like one of the Defence Secretary's missiles, precise and planned. It is inconceivable that the Times article was not run through the Conservatives' campaign machine, every word chosen carefully. And 4 weeks from the vote, calling Ed Miliband a backstabber, backstabbing first his brother and now the British people over Trident, if there's a deal with the SNP, will this be the moment we will remember